A new protest against the pension system in Chile as the uprising is in its 33rd day. Indigenous groups in Bolivia marched to the site of Tuesday's massacre to denounce brutal repression. And those are the images of the story in Bolivia. And 2 killed and several others injured after an Israel army airstrike hits Damascus. Hello, welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez in Quito, and this is from the South. We begin in Chile, where more protests are taking place on the 33rd day of the uprising against the neoliberal system. Thousands demonstrated in Plaza Italia against the private pension system known as the AFP. The protesters condemned the use of armored vehicles by the police, which entered the square firing tear gas. Later, more police arrived to try to disperse the crowd.
This is the reality. 90% of Chilean pensioners receive less than the minimum wage. If they don't have the support of close family members, they will die. On top of having miserable pensions, they have miserable health. They are not treated when they need healthcare. Senior citizens in Chile may become even poorer and not be able to retire at all. A lot of people in their 70s and 80s are now cleaning the streets because they don't have enough to eat. That is the reality.
Chile's police chief says he has ordered his forces to stop using rubber bullets during demonstrations. The intervention came after a university study revealed that these bullets were only 20% made of rubber. The remainder comprised of silica, barium sulfate, and lead. This, as the Chilean Ophthalmological Society said, it had recorded over 220 cases of severe eye injuries caused by these bullets during demonstrations. The police chief, Mario Rosa, says he has sought clarification from the manufacturer and commissioned independent studies from within and outside of Chile.
As a prudent conduct, it has been ordered to suspend the use of this non-lethal ammunition as a riot tool. Consequently, it can only be used like firearms as an extreme measure and exclusively for self-defense when there is imminent danger of death.
The Ombudsman for Children in Chile says her office has received almost 330 complaints over human rights violations, including children who were not participating in the protests but became victims of police behavior.
There have been many children who have been wounded as they were going about their daily lives, such as going out to buy bread with their mother, such as playing somewhere. I mean, we are also talking about children who were not even participating in protests, which is what makes police behavior even more serious.
And many of the protesters in Chile, including the Mapuche indigenous movement, are rejecting last week's agreement in parliament for a controlled move towards a new constitution. Our correspondent, Leonel Retamal, reports from Santiago.
The
uprising here in Chile against the injustice of the neoliberal system has now been going on for over a month. They're also demanding, of course, a new constitution that will break with the legacy of Pinochet-era constitution of 1980. One of the debates that has developed is about how Chile's indigenous people should take part in this constitutional process, because the protesters in the streets are not satisfied with the agreement reached in the parliament last week on this process. To understand more about how the indigenous peoples might be included or not, we can talk to Aucan Hualquiman. He's the spokesperson of one of the historic Mapuche organizations in Chile, the All Lands Council. So what are your criticisms of the agreement, and how far have you taken into account in the process?
This agreement that was signed, which they are calling an agreement for peace and a new constitution, is a perfect life raft for the traditional political class, for the government and for the political parties that operate in the Congress. But it completely excludes ordinary citizens, who are the ones who brought the situation about, and especially the indigenous people. So this constitutional process is a political stitch-up. Like many we've seen in this country, in which the citizens who have been protesting throughout the country will not be able to participate. This is why the indigenous people, and the Mapuche in particular, have taken the decision to begin our own constituent process, backed by international law, to adopt a statute of self-determination and form our own government in the territory of the South. A Mapuche government that will operate in a multilateral world, because the existing agreement does not give the indigenous people any real opportunity to participate, unlike the experiences in Venezuela, Colombia and Bolivia, where indigenous people their own representation in such constitutional process.
So today the public sector workers are continuing their strike and are holding a demonstration in the main avenue of Santiago. Pensioners are also calling a protest in the Plaza Italia, and a pot-bagging protest is called across Chile in the evening.
That was Donel Retamal from Chile. Organized indigenous communities in Bolivia have marched into Sencata, the site of a massacre on Tuesday. The indigenous movements from North Potosí came to denounce the killing. At least 7 protesters were shot dead by the police and army, and dozens more were wounded as they blocked the Sencata fuel depot near El Alto. Some of the victims were shot from army helicopters flying overhead. Meanwhile, in Cochabamba, access to the Guayani Bridge has reportedly been cut off by the police, and disturbances have been reported in the municipality of Punata. Many civilians said that the situation has gone worse because of the food shortages. And the Organization of American States has just passed a resolution to help Bolivia hold elections as soon as possible. The 5-point resolution tabled by Colombia and Brazil passed with 26 votes in favor, 3 against, 4 abstentions and 1 absence. The resolution backs sending a delegation to Bolivia to coordinate actions in accordance to international standards to expedite transparent elections. President Evo Morales said he would welcome new elections, but criticized the OAS, whose investigators concluded there were flaws in last month's election. Meanwhile, the Bolivian Senate has approved a draft resolution that will reshuffle members of commissions and committees for the 2019-2020 legislature. Bolivia's President Evo Morales has called for an immediate end to what he describes as a genocidal massacre taking place in his homeland, supported by the de facto government. Morales outrightly condemned the fatalities in El Alto, where security forces fired at protesters who were staging peaceful demonstrations.
And now we have seen, you saw the pictures of helicopters firing at peaceful protesters in defense of democracy. From Monday until yesterday, there have been 30 people killed. This is like the times of the military dictatorships. Yesterday, after 6 people were killed in El Alto. Again, they were in emergency mobilizing against this terrible de facto government and this massacre. The armed forces and the police should know that international treaties on human rights are above any national norms. These supreme decrees which authorize the armed forces to use violence, gave them a carte blanche. This was only something that happened in military dictatorships. And now this coup d'etat is going back to those times.
Morales, who has been granted asylum in Mexico, says he's willing to return to his country to assist in dialogue to end the political situation and the violence. He also expressed confidence that a truth commission will show the key role the OAS played in the coup d'etat.
And that's why we're proposing a truth commission with other institutions to show how the OAS effectively joined in supporting the coup. Many people have mentioned to me are members of Congress, and I heard some authorities from the de facto government, and our trade union leaders are taking decisions for marches, blocking. These have been broadened. What can I do from here?
Now let's turn to the Sencata Church in La Paz, where our correspondent Freddy Morales has the details.
We are here in the Sencata Church, where the autopsy of the 7 victims has been carried out. They were killed during clashes between security forces and protesters on Tuesday, when authorities had retaken the Sencata fuel depot, which is just a block away from this church. We are now joined by the Ombudsman for La Paz. Good afternoon. Could you tell us the latest update on the situation?
Good afternoon. Until now, the number of victims are the 7 people here at the church plus 2 others. Thanks to the autopsy, we could verify this morning that these 2 people were shot dead with bullets.
So until now, only 2 autopsies have been completed?
Yes, one in La Paz, and we have brought here the second corpse. The report of the first corpse autopsy hasn't been given to us yet, and we will have to wait to take a look at the second corpse's report till they complete the autopsy for the 7 other victims. It's impossible to comprehend the fact that we lived peacefully just a week and a half ago, but now everything has changed. Since October 20th, we have witnessed a coup and genocide. Yesterday, our brothers and sisters reported that armed forces and the police were firing at crowds from helicopters and said that there are more than 60 people injured in the 8th district and El Alto. And they told us that at least 9 people died.
In other news, the Colombian President Iván Duque has called his ambassador in Washington back to Bogotá after a leak of embarrassing conversations. Ambassador Francisco Santos, a former vice president, was recorded talking to Colombia's newly nominated foreign minister Claudia Blum at a restaurant in the U.S. capital. Both of them make disparaging remarks about Colombia's outgoing foreign and defense ministers, as well as the U.S. State Department. On Venezuela, Blum comments that the attempt to get the so-called humanitarian aid across the border with Venezuela was a fiasco. And Santos replies that the only solution may be to mount covert operations inside Venezuela. After this break, the first decisions in office by Sri Lanka's president are already causing outrage. We'll be back.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en la I.
Dot in the I. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. More stories at this hour. Health workers in Venezuela took to the streets on Tuesday. One mobilization was called by the opposition, while the other came out in support of the government. We have more in this report.
The first event of the day was called by the Venezuelan opposition. A small group gathered in front of a hospital in Caracas. On top of demanding higher salaries, they were protesting a lack of medicines while dismissing the effects of the US economic blockade.
Look, I don't know what to tell you. The only thing I can say is I'm here for my fellow workers, for the health of my patients.
In the afternoon, a large number of healthcare workers who heard the call of President Maduro gathered in Plaza Caracas. Here, they condemned the actions of the US government.
This is a murderous blockade that has killed many Venezuelans because we can't get medicine in time for patients.
US aggressions, according to the health ministry, caused a 30% setback in the health sector. At the same time, the government has strengthened relationships with Russia, China, Cuba and Palestine and announced the arrival of supplies that will last for the next 4 months.
We are all victims of this war, no matter who you support. That is why we make a call to the people in general, but especially to the opposition sector who thinks this is a game, that the government is making up the blockade. We want you to understand the truth and how it impacts us.
During the event, participants showed solidarity with Cuban doctors persecuted in Bolivia and with the ousted president, Evo Morales.
They cannot violate rights in other countries. Every country must be respected, and Venezuela supports Evo Morales.
Rain didn't stop this march, heading for Miraflores Palace. As citizens know, they must continue to fight foreign attacks.
Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley has described the past 2 days of island-wide power outages as unacceptable. She's vowed to get to the bottom of the problem. The Barbados Light and Power Company had suffered engine failure early on Monday that knocked out power to much of the island.
Even though there have been attempts to repair them in the past, and even though the life of those repairs may take them for another year or two, that is not acceptable. This government must give investors, must give Barbadians, must give school children, must give pensioners, must give everyone the comfort that the things to which we have become accustomed with respect to access to light, access to water, access to all other basic services that have been compromised over the course of the last decade must be returned to normalcy, and not only normalcy, but to standards that become the envy of not just the region but the world.
To other news now. Following the United States policy shift on Israeli settlements, European ambassadors to the United Nations, including Britain, France and Germany, have reiterated their position on the issue, calling all settlement activity illegal.
I'm making this statement today on behalf of Belgium, France, Germany, Poland and of course the United Kingdom. Our position on Israeli settlement policy in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, is clear and remains unchanged. All settlement activity is illegal under international law, and it erodes the viability of the two-state solution and the prospects for a lasting peace, as reaffirmed by UN Security Council Resolution 2334.
At least 2 people have been killed and several others injured after an Israeli army airstrike hit Damascus. The attack left substantial damage to buildings and other infrastructure. The Israeli army said it struck dozens of military targets in retaliation to rockets fired into Israel from Syria on Tuesday. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had blamed the Syrian military and Iran's Revolutionary Guards, Al-Quds Force, for the attack and promised retaliation before the strike. A court in Thailand has stripped an opposition lawmaker of his MP status over a media shareholding case. Thanathorn Yuangrungruangkit was accused of holding shares in a media company when he registered as a candidate. He denied the charges and said they are politically motivated, but judges at the Constitutional Court ruled against him. He gained popularity among the youth after calling for the military to be purged from politics. The removal of his MP status means the Election Commission could bring criminal charges that could lead him being banned from politics and jailed for up to 10 years.
So there's still lots of work to be done. I still have to campaign for the amendment of the Constitution. I still have to campaign for the end of the military conscription bill that we have tabled to the parliament last week. So as a leader of this political party.
Newly elected Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has appointed his brother as Prime Minister. The president's brother Mahinda, a former president himself, will be sworn in as Premier on Thursday, following the resignation of the current Prime Minister, whose party suffered a humiliating defeat at last weekend's presidential polls. In 2009, the Rajapaksa brothers ruthlessly destroyed the Tamil Tigers, a separatist and militant organization, to end Sri Lanka's decades-long civil war. With the security services they controlled, accused of war crimes and multiple human rights abuses. Swedish authorities have dropped an investigation into a rape allegation made against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Although the prosecutor's decision can be appealed, it likely closes a case based on rape allegations that was launched in 2010 and forced Assange to ask for asylum inside Ecuador's embassy in London to avoid extradition. A Swedish prosecutor said there is not enough evidence to indict Assange due to the case being almost 10 years old. Earlier this year, Assange was dragged out from the embassy by police in a violation of international law, and he is now in jail, waiting for extradition to the United States on computer hacking and espionage charges. In Malta, about 2,000 protesters have gathered outside the Prime Minister's office, calling for his resignation over the murder investigation of journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. Police arrested one of the country's most prominent businessmen, Jorgen Fenech, as he tried to leave Malta aboard his luxury yacht. The arrest came a day after Prime Minister Muscat offered to pardon a suspected middleman in the murder of Caruana Galizia if he provided legally binding evidence of who was behind the killing. Caruana Galizia was killed by a car bomb near the Maltese capital in 2017.
So the arrest of Jorgen Fenech is obviously a welcome development in the investigation into my mother's assassination. It's overdue and it's very important. What we're hoping for now and what we expect is that the authorities continue to investigate Fenech's links to the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and his now tourism minister.
Coming up, the airline strike continues in South Africa with no agreement in sight. Stay with us.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur.
Thank you for joining us again. Let's continue. Zimbabwean opposition supporters have clashed with security forces after attending a gathering that was not authorized by the police. Police fired tear gas and used batons to disperse the crowd that had blocked the roads around the party's headquarters in Harare, where the leader of the Movement for Democratic Change, Nelson Chamisa, was due to address them. Supporters got into a scuffle with riot police after they defied law enforcement's orders to not obstruct the roadway. The Ethiopian Sidama people have voted in a referendum that could determine autonomy for their region. Election authorities said results are expected within 24 to 48 hours, but it is very likely that the referendum will pass, leading to the Sidama to take control over local taxes, education, security and laws in a new self-governed region. About 2.3 million voters had registered for this referendum.
I arrived here at 2 a.m. in order to cast my vote early. This is a day we've been waiting for. It's like when a woman waits for the day she will give birth. I thank God for having this day, and that is why I came early to cast my vote.
Negotiations between South African Airways management and striking workers have once again collapsed. Management met workers' unions on Tuesday night in another bid to end the 5-day strike that has forced the airline to cancel more than 90% of its domestic and regional flights. The spokesperson for the National Union of Metal Workers, which represents the majority of the striking workers, Pacamile Mayola, said the talks collapsed after management withdrew the agreed offer of 6.5% pay rise at the 11th hour and went back to their earlier offer of 5.9%.
Very disheartening even for us, because whenever we think we're making progress, it's like we take 2 steps back. Last night we were so close, and we knew that this was the one that was going to seal it. This was the one that was going to end the strike. And then at the 11th hour they withdrew the deal. So for us really, and we've even said this, we are expecting mediation now at 2 o'clock. We've made it very clear to management at SAA and to CCMA. We've said to them, if you guys want us to mediate, understand that the opener for mediations is that offer of 6.5%.
And with that, we end our news brief. But you can find all of our stories on our website, telesur-english.net. And be sure to also join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursday, only on Telesur.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical move. Investigate.